Hey guys, this is Dave the Software Dev again, and this is going to be video tutorial 2 of our Let's Make a Video Game series where we're making a game like the snake games, where you have a snake that moves around on the screen and picks up food, and every time it eats a piece of food it grows a little longer. When we last left off we had built our tile screen here, sort of the first screen, and we defaulted everything to showing the floor tile, which is really grass, but we call it floor in the code. So for this video we're going to actually load in a level, and we're going to initialize our snake, and we're going to create the first food item. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to go to my index.html file here where I'm including several scripts, and I'm going to add a new script, and this one is going to be a script where we store the levels. So I'm going to call it js/snake level.js. Inside of our snake level, we're basically going to define the levels themselves. So I'm going to start by saying var snake equals the existing snake, or an empty dictionary. Now if you've seen that before in my previous video, I use that sort of as a namespace of sorts, whereas when this code runs it's going to create a variable called snake. If it already exists, it's going to continue using it. Now you'll see that in all of our code files here. And as these load in, that allows us to sort of extend that snake object. So we're going to create an array here of levels and populate them with the level data. And I'll show you. I'll just go ahead and get started on that. So here is our first level, and basically what I've done is I've defined an empty array of levels, and I've put one level value into it. Now level is really just a string. And as you can see, I've sort of laid it out here as it looks sort of like a matrix, but really this is just one string that's being concatenated together to build out our level. So the actual level in memory would look something like, this. It would have the first row, and then the second row, and then the third row. It's just going to be a string like that. So what we're doing here with this string is, if we go back to where we defined our grid types, which was here, in our snake.js file, I've got a floor tile assigned to 0, a wall tile assigned to 1, a snake is 2, and food is 3. So when we're building out these strings, it's going to use those same values. So this row of 1s is going to build a wall across the top row of our tile engine, and then down the side here you'll have 1s. Those will all be walls, and inside are 0s, which will be floors. So we're basically just going to load in that level and loop through each character in the level string and interpret it. If we hit a 1, it's a wall. If we hit a 0, it's a floor, so on. So let's write that little bit of code now that's actually going to load in our level. If you go to the index.html, you can see here in the snake init we're passing in level 0 already. I just wasn't using that anywhere. But if I go to my snake grid, snake.js on the init function, I'm accepting that level and not using it. So I'm going to add a parameter to the load grid. I'm just going to pass in that level. Let's save that, and then go to our grid, and on our load grid I'm going to have it accept a level. So right here we need to pull out our level string for the given level, and then parse through that level file to build our tile level. So I'm going to go ahead and write that code now. So here now, instead of just setting my grid item to a type of floor, I'm actually pulling the grid item out of the snake.levels for the given level. And then there's a formula here that runs, which is the y value that we're working with times the width plus the x value that we're working with. Let me explain that a little bit, because you're going to see that in a couple of spots. So you have basically each row is 20 grid spaces wide, and the level is 15 grid spaces high. So let's say you wanted to get whatever element is at position, x is 2, y is 1. right? So that would correspond here in our matrix to this is 0, that's 1, this is 2, and then down 1. So we would get that highlighted character right there. So we need a formula that will allow us to do that, and that would be y times the grid width, which is 20, plus x. That will return the character in this flat string that corresponds to that position. So in this case, that would be, let's see, what would that be? That would be 20 plus 2, that's 22, right? So if you look at this, this is 20 long, this is 21. I'm sorry, you start at 0, right? So this would be 0 through 19, and then 20, 21, and then 22. So I've highlighted what would be 22 at index 22 of our string, and as you can see, that is at x position 2, y position 1. That's the exact one that we want. So you're going to see this formula used in a couple other places throughout these videos. So we're pulling that level value for that index, and then we're parsing it into an integer with base 10. And that basically, since this is a 0, that's going to correspond to floor 0. And then when it hit a 1, that will correspond to wall 1. So where I'm loading that in, I then get the, I just pass that in as the type. So it's a 0 or 1. We're going to pass in the proper type to our grid item, and then that grid item will become a wall or a floor. All right, so here's what we had previously, where I was assigning everything to a floor. Let's do a refresh here, where it's going to load in level 0, and we should see our walls as we built them in the string. So there you have it. Our tile engine has loaded in that level, and it's built out the level to match what we put in the level string. Okay, so let's create our snake. So the snake is going to be separate from the actual tiles in the grid. It's going to be an array of positions which make up the snake. Or points, I should say. So let's go into our snake.js. I'm going to initialize that array. I'm just going to call it the variable snake. So inside of our snake namespace we have snake, which is an empty array to begin with. Now we want to populate that guy out, and what I want to do is I want to drop him initially in the center of the screen here. So I'm going to take the width of my tile engine, divide it by 2, and the height and divide it by 2, and that's going to give me the center of the grid. So I'm just going to add down here some code to initialize our snake. He's only going to have one position to begin with. That will be the center of the screen. So there you have it. I'm pushing one new grid item whose x is the grid width divided by 2, and whose y is the grid height divided by 2, and I'm giving it a type of snake. So our snake is an array of grid items that basically have x, y position and a type of snake. So as he grows larger, if we add 2 or 3 snakes to him, he's going to have position 0, which is the head, and then position 2, 3, 4, and so on. So next we need to actually draw the snake out. I'm going to put that in my draw grid function. We're just going to loop through the positions in the snake and draw each one. So there you have it. I'm just looping through the positions in my snake, and I'm just calling the draw just like I did for each individual tile. We're making use of this same capabilities here that we use for the tiles. We're just drawing the snake with it. So it's going to pull out that image of the snake instead of a floor or a wall, and it's going to draw each individual one. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Here we have our grid from before. I'm just going to refresh, and there we are assigning that center position to our snake and drawing the first element of the snake. So the last thing I want to do in this video is write some code to actually create the food that the snake is going to chase. So before we create our food element, I'm going to write a couple of helper functions. The first one will return whatever the type is of a given tile, and the second will set the type of a given tile. So the reason for that is when we're creating our food, you don't want to create food at a position that's being taken up by a wall, because the snake would never be able to grab it. So let's write these couple of functions here. So these are just little helper functions. They're super easy. The first one is set position type, takes XY coordinates and a type, and this uses that exact same formula that we used up here when we were pulling out of the level, whereas for a given XY position we want to set its type to whatever type we set it to, and then tell it to redraw itself. That way on the next frame it'll update to whatever type we chose. And this get position type is super simple. It just returns whatever the given tile type is of the XY coordinates that we pass in. So the function I'm going to write now is one that will actually create food. So I'm just going to call it create food. So here's our function that will create a piece of food on the screen, basically at a given tile. So there's a little bit of logic involved. Like I said, we don't want to create a food item where there is a wall. So we have a while loop here that's going to run until you randomly choose a position that's not a wall. So we initialize it to saying it's a wall, so it'll run at least once. And then we choose random XY coordinates on our grid. And we check the current type of that XY coordinates using our little helper function up here. We save that in current type. So if it's a wall, while this while loop runs again, it's going to choose another position, then another position, etc., 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 until it gets something that is not a wall. And then it'll break out of the while loop at that point. And at that, when that happens, we basically create a new grid item, just like we did for our snake, except we set it to our snake.food, and we give it a type of food. So snake.food is just another grid item, just like our tile and just like our snake, but it's going to represent a piece of food. So I need to draw the piece of food that I've just created. So we're going to call snake.food.draw, and we're going to pass in the context, and that will actually draw the piece of food on the screen. We need to also actually create our piece of food. So I've written the function to create the food, but I need to call that function. So in our snake.js, I've added here a call to snake.createFood. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here's what we had prior. I'm going to refresh, and as you can see, our piece of food is generated, and it chooses a random position. I'm just refreshing every time we call it to create our piece of food. So that sets up our snake and the food, and in our next video we're actually going to start moving around. If you like this video, please watch the next one, and like this video also on YouTube and subscribe. Thanks.